Hi everybody. This week we're going to be focusing on discounts. And so some of these topics might be very new to you unless maybe you've worked in the purchasing, accounts payable, or accounts receivable areas of a business. So we've all heard the term discount, but it has different meanings in the world of commerce. And so this week we're going to focus on what that term means. And so this week specifically, we will be looking at trade discounts. We'll also be learning about this term called the single equivalent discount rate. So you'll hear me use the term SEDR a lot this week. That again just stands for single equivalent discount rate. We're also going to be looking at cash discounts for fully paid and partially paid invoices. So when we talk about the net price with discount method this week, what we're really doing is just finding out how much a buyer really pays after discounts are applied. And so to compute the net price using the discount method, here's what we're going to do. First, multiply the trade discount by the list price. This is going to give you the discount amount. And next, we're going to subtract that discount from the list price, and the result is going to be your net price. So really it's just two steps. First, figure out how much of a discount you're getting, and then subtract it from the original price to see what you'll actually pay. And so let's take a look at this example here. Here we have Northeast Restaurant Supply. Let's say that they sell a set of stainless steel trays to Gideon's Bagels. There's a list price of $120, and Gideon qualifies for a 25% trade discount. And so what we're going to do is to compute the net price using the discount method. So the first thing I want to do is to break down this word problem and just list what is given to us. So we do have a list price, and it tells us that the list price is $120. And there's also a trade discount of 25%. And so using the discount method, remember that the first thing that we need to do is to find the discount amount. And our discount amount formula, as we saw from the previous slide, is simply your trade discount multiplied by our list price. Now that we have our formula, we can plug in those values. So that's going to be 25% times $120. So when we plug this in, this gives us a discount amount of $30. So this is just the discount amount that we just calculated, but remember it is asking for the net price. And if you recall, the net price is simply the list price minus our discount amount. So our list price was given to us, that was $120, and the discount amount is $30. So this tells me that the net price is $90. So $90 is what Gideon's Bagels is going to pay Northeast Restaurant Supply for that set of stainless steel trays after their discount. And so the complement method makes finding the net price faster, and instead of subtracting the discount from 100 or the list price each time, we're going to use the complement of the discount right away. So the first thing that we're going to do is to subtract the discount rate from 100% to get the complement rate. We're then going to multiply that complement rate by the list price, which is going to give us the net price. So there's going to be two things that we have to calculate for this. First, the complement rate, and then using that complement rate, we'll then calculate the net price. Okay, and so we're going to use the same information from the previous example, this time just by using the complement method. And so the previous data had a list price of $120, and there was a trade discount of 25%. And so the first step, if you recall, is to find the complement rate. And the complement rate is always going to be 100% minus the trade discount amount of 25% in this case. So this gives me a complement amount of 75%. Now that I have my complement rate, I'm just going to multiply that by my list price. So my list price times my complement rate is my net price. So $120 times 75% gives me still $90 as the net price. This is just a different way of calculating it. So just be very careful if it asks for different questions what the complement rate is or what the discount amount is. Be sure that you're able to calculate that. A series of trade discounts means more than one discount is applied in order, one after the other. And instead of adding the discounts together, each discount is taken off the new reduced price. So let's take a look at the steps of calculating them. So here's how it works when we have a series of discounts. First, we're going to apply the first discount rate to the list price, and that's going to give you a new price. And then for each additional discount, you take the price you just calculated and apply the next discount rate. And then this is just going to create a chain of intermediate prices. But if the buyer doesn't need to sell all of those intermediate steps, there is a quicker way. We can simply multiply the list price by all of the complement rates one after another to go to the net price. And so we're actually going to look at a couple of ways to calculate these. So let's take a look at example C. Here we have Northeast Restaurant Supply. They're selling a set of mixing bowls with a list price of $200. And let's say that Gideon's Bagels, they qualify for a series of discounts in the amounts of 25%, 20%, and then 10%. What we're going to do is to compute the net price using the discount method. And so the first thing I want to do is to take my list price of $200, and then I'm going to calculate the first discount. And the first discount is going to be on the first percent here. So we're going to separate these into three separate discounts. So I'm going to take 25% off of our $200. This gives me a discount amount of $50. And to find the new net price, I'm going to take that $200 and subtract the discount amount. This gives me a new net price of $150. So we've taken care of this 25%. Next, I'm going to take 20% of my new net price. So I'm just starting on a line below. I'm going to multiply that by 20. And 150 times 20% gives me $30. I'm going to find the new net price after this 20% discount. So that means I'm going to take this net price, and then I'm going to subtract that 20% discount amount, which was $30, and this gives me an adjusted net price of $120. So I've calculated the discounts for both 25 and 20%, and now I'm going to find the last, which is for this 10%. So I'm going to take $120 times 10%. This gives me $12. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my adjusted net price of $120. I'm going to subtract the discount amount of $12. And this is going to give me the final net price amount of $108. And so remember that I mentioned that we can't just add up all of these discounts, the 25%, 20%, and 10%. Although it might be kind of close to this 108 net price, a 25, 20, 10 discount isn't necessarily the same. And so generally businesses offer series discounts just as a way to reward different things like bulk buying or seasonal promotions or preferred customer status. And so let's see what happens if you were to do it the incorrect way and added everything up. And as I mentioned, it might be a little bit close, but it's not the same as this $108 net price. So if you were to add that 25% plus 20% and 10%, that would have given us 55% in total. And if we multiply 200 times 55%, again, it's close to that $108, but this is a series of discounts. It's not a bulk discount amount. So make sure that you do calculate this using the correct series, first with a 25% discount, then 20%, and then 10%. So that was just one way to calculate this. We can also use the complement method. And so we're going to use the same example here, or the same data rather. And so remember that was a $200 list price, and we had series discounts of 25%, 20%, and 10%. So by using the complement method, we're going to find the complements of each of these. And so remember that the complement is simply 100% minus the trade discount. So 100% minus 25%. This gives me 75%. The complement of 20% is 80%. And finally, the complement of 10% is 90%. Now that I have the complements, I'm going to go through those steps again on calculating the first discount. So I'm going to take our original list price, and I'm just going to multiply that by my first complement of my discount. So 200 times 75% gives me $150. Next, I'll take that new net price of $150 and multiply that by the second complement. So $150 times 80% gives me $120. And finally, I'm going to take that adjusted net price of $120 multiplied by 90%, and that's going to give me $108 as my final net price. And so both of the examples, both in example C and D, were a little bit long to do, but there is actually a quicker way to do this. And so let's take a look at how we can. So it says repeating example D. This time we're going to use the shortcut method. And so this is the complement shortcut method. And so with the shortcut method, what we're going to do is simply multiply the list price by the complements of the discounts. So remember, we calculated the discount of 25% as 75%, the complement of 20% was 80%, and finally the complement of 10% is 90%. So let's multiply everything together. And I am going to use just a regular calculator here. And so that's just 200 times all of the complements, so 75% times 80% times 90%. Notice that it gives me $108. Okay, so this was by using the complement shortcut method. There's also the equivalent single discount rate, or also called the single equivalent discount rate, or SEDR. So let's take a look at what that's going to entail. And so a single equivalent discount rate is the one discount that would give the same final price as a whole series of trade discounts. And so instead of applying each discount step by step, we can combine them into one overall rate. And so remember, we're not adding everything up, but let's take a look at the steps. So first, as we saw, we just compute the complements of each rate, and then we're going to multiply all the complement rates. We're then going to write that product expressed as a percent, and then we're simply going to subtract the product from 100% to get what's called the single equivalent discount rate. And so here, we're not calculating net price right now. We're just calculating our equivalent single discount rate. I call it the single equivalent discount rate, or SEDR. And so we have the same trade discounts of 25%, 20%, and 10%. Just like how we did previously, we're just taking the complements of each. Remember, the complement of 25% is 75%, and I got that by simply subtracting the discount from 100%. So the complement of 20% is 80%. And then finally, the complement of 10% is 90%. Okay, so those are just the complements. Once you find all of the complements, what we're going to do is to multiply them together. In this case, I am going to convert these into decimals. So 0.75 times 0.85, times 0.8 times 0.9. This is going to give me 0.54. But recall from the previous slide that for step 2, we're going to write that product as a percent. So 0.54 is equivalent to 54%. And now I need to calculate the SEDR, or single equivalent discount rate. And that's actually the complement of this 54%. So my SEDR, or single equivalent discount rate, is 100% minus 54%, which gives me 46%. And so let's think about what each of these values really means. So the 54% that we first calculated tells me that the customer is going to pay 54% of the list price after the discounts. The single equivalent discount rate, or the 46% that we calculated, means that the buyer is saving 46% off of the list price. So think about this single equivalent discount rate as the rate that they're saving, and the buyer pays 54% of the list price. And we can even check this in our calculator using the previous example. So if I were to use the same list price as the previous examples of $200 times 54%, this gives me $108, just like how we calculated before. So the customer, again, is paying 54% of the list price, and that 46% is their discount rate. Now let's talk about computing remittances. So when we have a cash discount instead of a trade discount, we're going to first start by multiplying the discount rate by the net purchase amount, and this is going to give you the cash discount. After you do that, you'll then subtract that discount from the net purchase amount, and then the remittance is the result. And a remittance is just the actual amount that the buyer needs to pay after the discount. So let's take a look at an example invoice here. So here we have an invoice from National Automotive Supply. The invoice is to Broadway Motors. And there are some interesting things here that we're going to learn this week. And it really focuses on terms of payment. So let's take a look at these, the dates, the terms, and then our gross and net amount. So the date is generally the date that the goods were shipped. In this case, let's say they were shipped on May 23rd, and we're assuming it's this year, so 2025. Here we have terms, and it says 2/10 N/30. Okay, and so these terms are going to be really important for you to understand. Whenever you have cash discounts and terms like these, the first number, so this 2, stands for a 2% discount, and the second number after that means that they're going to earn a 2% discount if they pay within 10 days of receiving their products, or in this case, their 24 gallons of car wax. Okay, so the first number again is always the percent discount that they'll get, and the number after that is the number of days they have to receive that discount. So if they don't pay within 10 days, they're not going to get that 2% discount. After that, we have an N30. So N stands for net, and the 30 stands for the amount of days they have to pay the entire invoice. So whether or not they do pay within the 10 days just for the discount, they need to pay that entire bill within 30 days of receiving this invoice. Okay, and so they need to pay the net price within 30 days. So that's what these sets of numbers mean here. Sometimes you might see terms of maybe 3/15, meaning that they have 15 days to get a 3% discount. You might also have maybe an N45 or N60, meaning that they have 45 or 60 days to pay their bills. And so when we're dealing with cash discounts, as I mentioned, it's really important that we are able to examine the dates and understand the discount period and the due dates. And so this image is the same image that you'll see in the e-text. So remember that we're assuming that the invoice was sent and received, let's say on May 23rd. And because there was a 210, meaning that they had 10 days to receive the 2% discount, 10 days after May 23rd falls on June 2nd. And so June 2nd is called the discount date. The period between the time the invoice was sent and the discount date is called your discount period. And also we had a net 30, meaning that they had 30 days to pay their entire balance. And so 30 days after May 23rd is June 22nd, which is also their due date. And so it might get a little bit confusing trying to calculate 10 days after May 23rd, but I did include this days of the year calendar in the Lamaku lessons, and I want to go over on how you would use this days of the year calendar. And so I just zoomed in a little bit. On our top column here, or our top row rather, we have all of the months listed, and then on the leftmost column we have the days of the month. So if we take a look at, let's say, January 10th, so if I go down to January and the 10th, this tells me that January 10th is the 10th day of the year. If I was looking for maybe July 25th, I would go to my July column, and then looking at the day of the month to 25, this tells me that July 25th is the 206th day of the year. Okay, and so let's take a look at this previous example where we had May 23rd. So what I'm going to do is to see where May 23rd falls. So here's my May column. If I go down to 23, May 23rd is day 143. And I'm just going to write this down here. So May 3rd was day, and I've already forgot, May 23rd was day 143. To find the discount period, remember that was just 10 days, so I'm going to add 10 for the number of days in my discount period, and this is going to give me 153. So to find the discount date, or the last day that we can get a discount, I'm going to look for day 153 on my calendar and see where that falls. So here's 153, and that tells me that day 153 falls on June, and then looking at the day of the month calendar, that is on June 2nd. Okay, and so that's just one way that we can calculate this without actually opening up your your calendar on your computer and trying to figure this out. I strongly suggest that you do get used to using this days of the year calendar. Okay, as for the due date, remember that is 30 days in this example from the invoice date. So if I take the invoice date of 143 plus 30 days, this gives me 173. So I'm going to look for day 173 on my calendar, and so that is in this column. So that is June 22nd. And here we can see that it does match up with what we have here. Okay, so that's how you would use the days of the year calendar to find the discount date as well as the due date. And so now let's put this into practice. Okay, here let's say that Broadway Motors, they pay the $528 invoice within the 10-day discount period under the terms 210 net 30. And let's start calculating this. So the first thing I want to do is to calculate my cash discount amount. So we are assuming that they did pay within the 10-day discount period. And so remember that they do receive a 2% discount. So I'm going to take the invoice amount of $528 times 2%. This gives me a discount of $10.56. And then the remittance, or the final amount that they actually paid, is simply their invoice amount minus the discount amount. So assuming that they paid their invoice under their terms within that 10-day discount period, that means that they paid $517.44. And so that was just a simple example. However, in reality, there might be returns or freight or shipping charges. And so to find the final amount owed, there's a specific order of steps to follow. First, we calculate the net purchase by taking the invoice amount and subtracting any merchandise returns and freight costs. Then you would calculate the cash discount, of course, by multiplying the discount rate by the net purchase that you just calculated in step 1. You would then subtract that cash discount from the net purchase. This is called your cost of merchandise. And then finally, if there's any shipping charges, we would add it back to get to the remittance. And so that's the total that the buyer is actually going to pay. And so generally, the buyers don't get a discount on the shipping or freight charges, and that's why we subtract it before we calculate the cash discount, and then at the end we add it back. And so let's take a look at this example here. So we have an invoice amount of $510. There's $30 in freight charges. We have an invoice date of August 13th. Terms are $210 net 30. Let's say that they returned $200 worth of merchandise, and then they pay the invoice prior to the discount date. So we're going to calculate the cash discount as well as the remittance. And then also we're going to find the discount date and the due date. So we want to see when the discount period ended as well as when the final bill was due. So I'm going to start by listing what we know. So I'm going to start by writing down my invoice amount. And that is $510. We have freight of $30. And we also have returns of $200. In addition, sorry, I'm going to rewrite that a little bit. $210. Okay, my invoice date was August 13th. And my terms are $210 net 30. And so I'm actually going to do this by just finding my discount date and due date first. So my discount date is 10 days after August 13th. For this one, I don't need to use my days of the year calendar because it's easy to just add 10 days from August 13th, which would be August 23rd. So Aug 13 plus 10 days is August 23rd. That's my discount date. My due date, and probably in this time I do want to use my days of the year calendar. So August 13th plus 30 days, and let's take out that calculator or that calendar. So here we have August 13 is day 225. So I'll take 225 plus the 30 days. And so day 255 is when it's going to be due. So day 255 falls on September 12th. So this tells me that they have until August 23rd to receive that 2% discount, and their bill is due September 12th. So that was the discount date and the due date. Now let's start calculating the net purchase. So my net purchase is simply my invoice amount of $510 minus freight and any returns. And so this is $280 as my net purchase. Now I'm going to calculate my cash discount. And that's the $280 times the 2% discount that they received, because it does say that they did pay within that discount period. So they paid the balance of the invoice prior to the discount date, so they did receive this 2%. This is $5.60. So $5.60 is the cash discount. Now I'm going to calculate the cost of merchandise. And this is going to be the net purchase amount of $280 minus the cash discount amount of $5.60. And this gives me $274.40. Okay, finally, we're going to calculate the remittance. So this was just how much that they'd have to pay for the merchandise after that 2% discount. But the remittance, remember, includes any shipping charges. So we're going to take that cost of merchandise of $274.40, and then we're going to add back the freight because, as I mentioned previously, the buyers don't get a discount on shipping charges. And so this gives us $304.40. Okay, there's also a complement method for computing your remittance. And so here's a process. So first we would start with the net purchase. That's just the invoice amount minus any merchandise returns or freight and freight. Next, you would find the complement rate by subtracting the cash discount rate from 100%. And then we would just multiply the net price by the complement rate to get the cost of merchandise. And then finally, if there was any freight, just like before, we would just add it back in to get the remittance or the total amount that the buyer needs to pay. And so let's take a look at this example by using the complement method for cash discounts. So the first thing we're going to do is to find our net purchase. And so our net purchase is simply our invoice amount of $510 minus returns and freight. Okay, and this is going to give me $280. Next, I'm going to find the complement rate. And we're still assuming the previous example of H. Remember that it was a 210, so they had a 2% discount. So the complement rate of 2% is 98%. Remember, the complement is always 100% minus that discount. And that, again, is 98% for this example. So now when I calculate the cost of merchandise, I'm going to take my net purchase amount of $280 and multiply it by the complement rate of 98%. This gives me $274.40. And then my remittance amount, of course, is my cost of merchandise plus the freight that we are adding back. Okay, so this was just another method of calculating the cash discount and remittance, this time just by using this complement method of taking the complement of the discount, in this case 2%, and then multiplying it by the net purchase price to get the cost of merchandise. And so there are times when a buyer is going to want to take advantage of a cash discount, but maybe they can only afford to pay part of that invoice within the discount period. And so if the vendor allows discounts for partial payment, their invoice can still be reduced. Okay, so here are just the steps. We're going to first find the complement rate of the discount. We're then going to find the amount credited by dividing the dollar amount paid, or the remittance, by the complement rate. And then finally, we're going to find the unpaid balance by subtracting the amount credited from the invoice amount. And so let's take a look at example H here, or example J. Okay, so we have Larry. They buy shelving supplies with an invoice amount of $484. And I'm just going to write that down because it's easier to write what we know. $484 was my invoice amount. Terms are 210, net 60. So they have 10 days to get that 2% discount, and then their bill is still due within 60 days of the invoice date. And so let's say that within the 10-day discount period, he sends in a check for $300. So with a discount for the partial payment, how much credit should he receive? And what is going to be his new unpaid balance? So the first thing that I want to do is to find the complement of my discount rate. So the complement of 2% is simply 98%. Now I'm going to find the amount credited. And so I'm going to take the $300, because this is what he tried paying in advance within that discount period, times 98%. Rounded to the nearest cent is $306.12. Okay, so this is the amount credited. So even though he only paid $300, he was credited for $306.12 because of that 2% discount that he received. So finally, we're going to find the unpaid balance. And the unpaid balance is simply our invoice amount of $484 minus the amount that was credited. And this leaves me with $177.88 that he still needs to pay within 60 days of receiving that invoice. Okay, so $177.88 is the unpaid balance that he still owes. And let's take a look at this final example. Okay, in some cases, a buyer might decide in advance the total amount that they want credited. And so let's say that Ike Storage Center buys $484 worth of shelving materials. The terms are 210 net 60, and he wants to pay enough within the 10-day discount period to reduce his unpaid balance by exactly $300. So what amount should Ike remit to the seller, and what will be the new unpaid balance? So the first thing I'm going to do is to find our cash discount amount. And so that's simply our payment of $300. And this is because he wants to reduce the unpaid balance by exactly $300 times 2%. This gives me a $6 cash discount. As for the remittance, this is at $300 minus the $6 cash discount, which is $294. So this is what he would actually pay within the 10-day period. And then the remaining, or the unpaid balance that he still owes within the 60-day period, is the invoice amount of $484 minus the $300, and this gives us $184, which is the unpaid balance. And so make sure that you work through these problems in your assignment very carefully this week. Be very mindful of correctly identifying whether or not they paid within the discount period. Also make sure that you are able to use that days of the year calendar and that you're able to understand the different terms here, especially on your calculation.